Have you ever wondered how the hygiene practices of ancient Rome's emperors compare to ours today? The Romans had access to public baths, restrooms, and aqueducts to support cleanliness. However, their hygiene practices were shockingly repulsive. Did you know that urine was one of the main resources used for laundry services? Urine was even traded and taxed in public restrooms, and soldiers were paid with the money collected. Stay tuned to learn more about the hygiene practices of ancient Rome's emperors, including their use of public baths, restrooms, and private toilets. Step back in time and take a peek into the hygiene habits of ancient Rome. From exfoliating cleansers to public baths and restrooms, the Romans had a variety of hygiene customs. Even the emperor and the common people had access to these services. But don't be fooled by the aqueduct and network systems in place to support cleanliness. The reality is that some of their hygiene practices were downright repulsive. It's hard to imagine how the Romans managed to keep clean with some of the habits they had. But one thing's for sure, their approach to hygiene was certainly unique. It's interesting to note that urine was one of the main resources used at the time for laundry services. Although Romans didn't have soap in the modern sense, they did use animal and human urine, which contained large amounts of ammonia to wash away oil and dirt from clothing. Urine was a commodity that was traded from a public restroom, and Roman soldiers were paid with the money collected from urine taxes. Vespasian, who ruled as emperor from 9 to 79 AD, was the first to implement this strategy. However, Suetonius, who described a conversation between the two, reports that Titus, Vespasian's son, was turned off by the tax. When Titus criticized Vespasian for planning a tax on public restrooms, he put a piece of his own payment under his son's nose and inquired as to whether the smell bothered him. Vespasian cracked a joke after Titus's negative response, yet it comes from urine. The lower classes in Rome engaged in communal bathing, and the wealthy had private baths. As the Roman Empire grew, bathhouses were constructed in both little and big towns by the 1st century BC. Prior to her terrifying experience in 63 AD, Livia, Augustus's mother, was among the prominent Romans who frequently visited public baths. Suetonius claims that after a serpent crawled on her, Livia immediately purified herself, but was unable to remove a mark from her body that matched the colors of the serpent. After that incident, she never again went back to a public bath. While ancient Rome used a variety of hygiene techniques, some of them, like using urine in laundry, was revolting. But both the lower and upper classes enjoyed going to the Roman baths, which were a notable aspect of their sanitation practices. Others who visited the public baths admired Emperor Hadrian's habit of going there frequently. Hadrian was a member of the common people, but he was not above helping those in need. This happened once when he saw a veteran rubbing his body and back against the bathroom wall. Hadrian gave the veteran the money and slaves he needed when he heard that he didn't own a slave to do it for him. Others sought the emperor's favor as a result of this deed of kindness, creating a rather amusing scene where old men rubbed themselves against the wall in an effort to obtain some kind of reward. Hadrian told them to rub each other instead in response. The Roman custom of taking a bath in public was, however, hardly hygienic. Without regard for privacy, men, women, young people, and seniors took baths in the same water together. It was also common to urinate and perform other bodily functions, leaving the ensuing mess for others to clean up. In the end, Hadrian banned mixed-gender bathing in public facilities. Roman bath complexes were multi-purpose buildings that included gyms, gathering places, steam rooms, and locations for public services. In many facilities, male and female bathers had separate rooms, but they were still connected. Hadrian introduced gender-specific baths, enhancing the privacy and hygienic standards of Roman public bathing. In the Roman Empire, having access to running water and public baths was a privilege reserved for the affluent. Both common baths used by men and women were banned by Emperor Marcus Aurelius and Emperor Septimus Severus later outlawed their upkeep. Although public baths were restored, the aqueducts did not provide running water to the poor people's tenements. The emperor and the wealthy had access to running water in their mansions and palaces, which were connected to the aqueducts by lead pipes. In Pompeii, all but the very poorest homes had water pipes with taps, and the wastewater was piped away into trenches or sewers. People who did not have access to running water used commodes or chamber pots and dumped their waste into vats under the stairs, which then went into cesspools all over the city. The public restroom used by the Romans were made of stone benches with holes carved in the tops, lined up next to one another, and had no privacy. Unexpectedly, it was common for people to have important discussions or even finalize business deals while using the restroom. There were numerous seats in the public restrooms that led to the sewage systems. Wealthy Roman citizens had the option to install private latrines in their homes close to Tivoli. The marble seats and fortifications on the toilets, had the Emperor Hadrian ordered, are numerous. These single-seat restrooms, which were intended for people of various social classes, were grouped together near dining areas. Some of these toilets may have even had bubbling fountains to rinse spa sponges that were used for cleaning, according to archaeological evidence. Furthermore, where the sponges would have been kept, there is proof of foundations and sink-like structures. Private toilets and baths were much more hygienic alternatives to the public Roman bathhouses, which were rife with diseases and parasites, even though Hadrian and his fellow nobles may not have known this at the time. Emperors and commoners alike used a strigil, which resembled a sickle, to wipe away sweat and oil after exercising or taking a bath. Before using a strigil to scrape off into gutters or tiny pitchers, Romans covered themselves in oil. There was no use of soap, and a cold water rinse came next. Poor bathers had to scrape themselves. Wealthy people had slaves do it for them. However, using the strigil excessively could have unfavorable effects. Even though the rinse that came after a thorough scrape was supposed to replenish moisture, the procedure hurt the skin, and the scribbles were quite sharp. Suetonius believed that Emperor Augustus's ringworm-like skin lesions were the result of his constant itching and frequent use of a strigil. However, Roman society was infamous for its subpar sanitation practices, which were not the result of ignorance, but rather neglect. Despite attempts to organize public rubbish collection services, the streets of Rome and other cities were often covered in garbage, particularly in poorer districts. The waste, mostly food and household waste, was so thick that stepping stones were sometimes used to navigate through it. The abundance of trash led to a proliferation of rodents and vermin, commonly in cities with waste disposal issues. In ancient Rome, the spread of disease was a significant concern. Poor food hygiene and standing water on damaged streets during winter were potential breeding grounds for diseases like malaria. As a result, like many societies before the late 19th century, Rome was prone to significant disease outbreaks, including the Antonine Plague of 165 AD to 180 AD. This pandemic, which may have been smallpox or measles, claimed the lives of between 5 and 10 million Roman citizens, equating to 10 to 15% of the empire's total population at the time. Despite the unsanitary living conditions, the ancient Romans valued appearances and practiced good hygiene to convey their wealth and social standing. Bathing, wearing perfume, and receiving regular dental care were essential practices. Clothing also served as a status symbol, and garment care and maintenance were lucrative businesses in ancient Rome. Falones, or laundry workers, operated lanicas, similar to modern-day laundromats, and were responsible for the entire garment care process, from washing to drying, rinsing, and drying. The Ancient History Encyclopedia states that Romans did not use modern detergents to wash their clothes, but instead relied on urine collected from public restrooms or imported from neighboring towns. Each Roman city had a filanica, where citizens could bring their laundry in to be washed. The majority of Romans wore white woolen togas that were prone to staining and absorbing bad odors. To combat this, the ancient Romans discovered that the ammonia in urine could effectively break down the dirt, keeping their whites looking fresh and eliminating stubborn stains on their togas. According to a dictionary of Greek and Roman antiquities, this was a widely accepted practice among Romans. As we wrap up this journey through ancient Rome's hygiene practices, it's clear that the Romans had both innovative and repulsive hygiene practices. While they had aqueducts and network systems to support cleanliness, their use of urine in laundry and mixed-gender bathing in public facilities leaves us cringing. However, as we've seen, some of the emperors like Hadrian were champions of hygiene reforms, introducing gender-specific baths and advocating for private toilets and baths. It's fascinating to think about how their practices have influenced modern-day hygiene habits. What do you think about ancient Rome's hygiene practices? Let us know in the comments below. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to our channel for more content like this. And don't forget to leave a comment below to share your thoughts and insights about ancient Chinese hygiene practices. Thanks again for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.